Welcome to Weird Games and Weirder People, a podcast about role-playing games and the weird, wonderful people behind them.
Hello, wonderful weirdos. This is Diogo Nogueira, and today's guest is the amazing Luke Gearing. He's an amazing writer, adventure creator, and game designer, even though he has a little bit of a problem with this term. But before we get into that, I would like to do a few announcements. I will be at Game On Expo on Phoenix, Arizona from March 15th to 17th, and I will be on GaryCon on Lake Geneva, Wisconsin from March 23rd to 25th. Also, please subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to your podcast so you get updates when we release new episodes. And please leave us a review, share with your friends, with your family, with people that like games. And please support the show too. Look on the show notes to see how you can pay us a coffee at Ko-Fi or buy one of my books to keep the show going. And I will do what I can here to keep the show going too. But getting back to Luke Gearing, we talk about how he has been doing game stuff for years and years, and now he's tackling bigger and bigger projects, more ambitious projects. We talked about how he objects the term game designer and see himself more as a writer, a fictional writer, someone who creates situations. He's really into writing more adventures and setting instead of systems. We talk about that. We talk about how he's not very interested in systems and in different games, and more about settings and in stories and situations. We talk about his love for music, his love for noise. We talk about plans. We exchange many wisdom, facts and insights that we share about gaming, about life in general. It was a fantastic chat. It was really, really enriching. I hope you like it as much as I did. So let's get weird with Luke Gearing. Hello Luke, welcome to Weird Games and Weirder People. I'm very happy to have you here. I'm excited to talk about Sawyers and talk about your work in the RPG, which is a really big reference to me. So how have you been, Luke?
Yeah, good. And thank you for saying that. It's very kind of you to say. And thank you for having me on as well. I'm excited to do it.
Yeah, well, first of all, how do I say your last name? Is Luke Gearing?
Gearing.
Is that right?
Gearing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So Luke Gearing, it's an honor to have you here. Maybe the wonderful wielders who listen to the show might don't know who you are and all the amazing things that you do. So if you can you say who is Luke Gearing, what is that you do? And if you can, just share a small detail about yourself, maybe the way you wake up in the morning, what is that you do, or the way you pour your coffee or anything like this.
Sure. So I'm Luke, and I usually just say writer. A lot of people use the term game designer, but maybe we'll get into that one later. So I've been doing stuff for, it must be around a decade now. Just starting with like a little blog and kind of doing bigger and bigger projects as time's gone on. So like some of the more recent stuff, some of the stuff with Mothership, obviously, some of the big ones, Wolves as well at the moment. Quite a lot for Troika with Dancel, as well as sort of Fever Swamp was like the first like book. So in terms of the really quotidian stuff you want to know, like I guess as soon as I wake up, first things first, I've got to take the dog for a walk. Because my wife gets up a lot earlier than I do, so I do the dog. And for coffee, I use a cafetiere. I always have done. Yeah.
Yeah. You talk about being a writer and then you talk about game design and you're gonna talk about it later. Do you see a big difference in that? Do you see yourself as both as a writer and a game designer, or is this like the way you talk? It seems like it's kind of something people threw at you and you see more as a writer, or am I reading too much into it?
I mean, some of it's a little tongue in cheek, but I do think, like for me, it's it's primarily a written form of communication. So like for me, that's the primary thing I'm trying to always like kind of focus on and improve on is the writing aspect. Like it's not to say game design's bad, obviously, or anything like that. It's just like especially because like generally my preferences run to more towards doing adventures as well. Like the kind of more systemic stuff is like usually somewhat less interesting to me. So for me, focusing on the idea of it being like a written thing, like a book that you read. That's like important. Like for me, if I'm reading someone else's adventure or like book, like system book or whatever, like if it's boring to read, I'm very likely to just put it down and never think about it again. And there's some stuff that kind of breaks that, but it's the quality of the writing is like really top priority for me in terms of the work I put out and what I like to read and use subsequently.
Yeah, that's true. And you have a really great way with words, like those books you wrote about treasure and monsters. They're kind of poetic, and a game book too are fascinating. And for me, genius. I wish I could write that well, and it is fantastic. And I realize that you write a lot of adventures, but is Swivers the first game in like you're designing, or have you ever designed games before that?
So
Entire games, I mean.
Swivers like started like 5 or 6 years ago. Like it technically predates Blades in the Dark by like a couple of months, which is always fun because people always obviously compare it to that. What would it being like a crime game? But I think apart from like some scribbles when I was like very very young before I was sort of doing this seriously, it's the first time I was like sitting down and kind of making something whole cloth. So yeah, I guess it would be the first one, but like whilst it's been kind of in pre-publication, I've done a few other like smaller things, but they tend to be quite sort of short, sharp, and focused. Like there's never been anything quite so large as Swivers. Like Wolves has a lot of content, but the actual rules themselves are super light. There was like violence, but that's almost more of like proving a point than anything else in some ways. Where it's just like here's the rules for combat, everything else just talk to your players, and that's kind of like the point. I think those are like the main ones that like stick out in my mind. There's like a couple, but like definitely more adventures and systems at this point, which is definitely the way I want to keep it.
Oh yeah,
Because I think like
that's actually what I
oh,
want to try to. I always write a lot of systems, and having I never thought I would write good adventures. And when I one adventure I wrote, people actually liked it, and somehow I won an award for it. And I thought, yeah, I want to try writing more adventures, because it is like you said, like rules. For me, it's kind of fun because it plays with how the games can work and creates more story and narrative. I like to play with games that the games themselves help you create more interesting and twists in the games. But working with setting and adventures and creating this kind of fiction and words that the players can play with to create their own words. It's kind of a system of symbols in a way. Maybe the rune systems give you the tools and the boats and the things that makes things move, but the ingredients to make this meaningful and it's all about the adventure and the setting. And I think you excel in that, like few people do. So yeah, it's fun to see also you creating this together with a game system, and I'm curious to see how that develops. So I'm excited about that.
yeah,
You
I think
mentioned, yeah, go ahead.
the divide is like it's really interesting because like you say, I think there's definitely something to the idea of like the system does like some stuff for you, but it's kind of like it's non-specific. Even if it's for like a specific setting, it's like you can look at a system and you can imagine all the stuff you might be able to do with it. Whereas an adventure is kind of like it's like a concrete substantiation of those ideas, which like is a lot scarier to write because then it's if the adventure's bad, then you made a bad adventure. Whereas like a system just kind of implies a bunch of stuff, so it's kind of less it's more difficult to point at something and say, "Oh,
Yeah,
this wasn't good," or "this wasn't a great idea," or whatever. But I think that's also part of what makes it worth doing is that it's like it's more difficult and more specific, and you have to kind of
yeah.
own it. Like you have to
The
just be like, "Yep, like, this is
specificity.
the thing."
Yeah.
Yeah, which is like a good thing. Like ultimately, it just does
Oh
make
yeah.
it more intimidating. I think, which is why a lot of people shy away from them a bit more.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's something to do that I think that designing traditional role playing games, like you said, like at the game system, you have a really great adventures. I think it's kind of easier because you can count on the group and the GM to run the game, so they will put the stuff in for you. So it's kind of incomplete. But an adventure, no, you have to have everything there for them to play and find out what happens. So You have to be way more thoughtful and way more concise and tie things in a way that sometimes you don't need to when you're just designing a game system or maybe an adventure generator. So yeah, like in
No, for
solo
sure.
games, you have to make everything work and produce a result instead of counting on someone else to do it for you. Yeah,
Yeah, you can't kind of rely on the GM as like a shortcut for the game being good, because ultimately the thing that decides how good any game is the players at the table, right? So
yeah,
I think system design stuff can really heavily lean on that. Like there's still stuff that's like good where I can look at something, oh, that's
oh
like
yeah,
impressive, like this is a good
of course,
generator
of
or
course.
whatever. But
Yeah, yeah,
like a good generator is never going to excite me as much as like a really good adventure. Like the adventure's like, oh, this is like a thing, I can just go play it. Great, done, perfect. Which is kind of what I like to provide as well. Like, yeah, something you can
yeah.
actually just use at your table.
You mentioned working on Swivers for a few years. Has the game changed a lot since then? And if it did, uh, what motivated you to change the game as you developed it?
So way back when it started as just like a slight BX hack, which weirdly it all started with Stars Without Number. So I was running that for some friends, and I realized that the way, because even though it's like, so Stars Without Number, sci-fi setting, but you still have like the BX chassis where like you gain hit dice and levels and whatever. And I was like, that doesn't feel right. And I was like, well, why does it feel right for fantasy? And I was like, well, it's just genre familiarity. So what if you didn't gain hit points like in that way? What if you didn't gain hit dice? What if it was like kind of set at the beginning, very limited growth, and then it kind of grew out of there where I was just like, okay, like what can I like streamline away? What can I add that I think's cool? So it started, I say, way back when as a simple reduction and streamlining of BX, and it kind of like, oh, like dying in a tomb, like that's kind of like the thing that's really fun because I was really into a lot of like the Appendix N, like classic literature at that point, so it's like really into Clark Ashton Smith. And there's a couple of them where like as Swiver started named, like people just die in a tomb, and that's kind of the story. Which are really good fun. They're great. Um, so that kind of grew, and then it was like kind of as the setting developed through the generation of like a bunch of tables basically, so you can kind of roll up your own idea of what this city looks like, district by district, and kind of, so I was always finding, especially back then, with something that large, if you make it yourself as a GM, you remember more of it. Whereas like a big city like that, kind of remembering that from a book is a lot of work. So it's
Oh
like, well,
yeah,
just kind of give them the generators, then let them make it themselves. Um, so that was good. Then we kind of got the agreement to kind of publish it, and then for various reasons things slowed down production wise, but that kind of did give me more time to refine it. So as my tastes grew, it kind of diverged further and further away from its kind of BX roots to the point now where, apart from the fact there's hit points, it's basically unrecognizable. Probably like just like a lot of changes, like armor's much less of a big deal. So like your kind of defense is like based on what weapon you have, because if you've got a long weapon, it's harder to get close to you. And like for something
nice.
like D&D, which is a bit more zoomed out, more abstracted, that makes perfect sense. But for this, it's like really short, sharp fights where you can get a little bit more granular.
Yeah, Pathfinder
So yeah,
Grandmaster weren't wearing like lots of armor, so it makes perfect sense. Like,
yeah, and like, and if the players do go that route, then obviously that's like a cool and interesting thing where they're kind of twisting the setting a lot, or like they've done a lot of work to get a bunch of armor. So it's like that's cool, that's
yeah,
fun. As well as like a lot of kind of taking the bits and pieces from like other games. Like I was really into Warhammer Fantasy for a while, so like the way death and dismemberment works, kind of super inspired by that. So it's kind of, in some ways, it's like a big grab bag of just stuff I've seen other people do that I've really enjoyed, as well as kind of trying to come up with, or just kind of not even coming up with on purpose, but kind of just like finding out about this setting as I was working on it. Like, oh, like this is a thing that exists, that's a thing that exists. Let's kind of go on from there.
yeah, nice. Uh, what's since we're talking about this, like inspirations you drew from, something that I always ask people who come here is that if they can identify maybe any area or region of inspiration that you see yourself constantly drawing upon. I know as artists and writers and game designers, we are always drawing anything that happens to us, like our daily lives, things we're interested in at the moment. But I, for example, draw a lot from the things that I enjoyed in my childhood, like comics, movies, and cartoons. Do you identify anything like this for yourself? It could be like a period of life, or like when this kind of genre of fiction or anything like this that you see yourself constantly drawing from for inspiration.
I can't think of like a specific period because like I think one thing that I do with a lot of my games, there's a focus on like the physical like geography, like on a lot of the stuff I've worked on, and some of that's like the nature adventures, they're like in the location. But like one thing I'm always like the first thing I want to do is like have a map that I can point at and be like, this kind of describes what this place is like, and then focus on like being in the place. Because I think we did when I was growing up, we did a lot of like travel around the UK, more than like foreign holidays. So there was kind of a lot of like sense of different place as well as the sense of like history in each place. Because obviously like the UK is full of ruins, and it's like, oh, this one's Roman, this one's this one's from medieval period, this one's like a manor house that's from the 1800s, but it's been like refurbished or whatever. And it's kind of there's like these layers of history that I think is really interesting. So I think that's kind of represented a lot. Like one thing I've heard a lot of people say is there's a sense of like history and like kind of
Like a real
history
place,
and
right?
place being combined together. And like that's the thing I think about a lot, like how like not just what's going on now, but what has been going on and kind of the conditions that lead to what's happening now. Like you can go like silly with it, where it's like, oh, I need to know like the entire 1,000 year history, and it doesn't need to be that much. But like, what are the visible parts, and what are some of the invisible parts? Is something I think about a lot.
Yeah.
And a lot of that comes from like non-fiction reading as well, that kind of reinforces that. Like, I read a lot of non-fiction as well as fiction, but and
Like
a fair
history
amount of that's like
books, archaeology, this kind of stuff.
yeah, like a lot of that stuff. Like I read this one called The Golden Rhinoceros that's really cool, where it's like looking at the history of like Africa as a continent through like a few specific artifacts. And that's like fantastic. It's a really well written book. I believe it was translated from the French, but yeah, it's just really nice as a way to approach history through these like specific artifacts, kind of talking about like how did it get where they found it, what's its kind of origin, its kind of like meanings. So yeah, that's a really good one, Golden Rhinoceros. For That's like a big influence on like and treasure. Yeah, really good one.
Nice. Do you continue to travel to explore these places? And if you do, would there be maybe any famous ruins or place that you would like to visit and experience?
Obviously, over the past few years, a bit less. So we had like lockdown, and then me and my wife got married last year. So not so much travel lately. But it's definitely something I'd like to do. There's a few places kind of always wanted to see, both kind of natural and ruins. Like I've always wanted to see some of the deserts in the southern United States. I just thought they'd be like they, because obviously we don't have anything like that in the UK. There's no desert here. So seeing something that's like so totally different would be really cool. There's a lot of like kind of some of the European ruins as well that are kind of like very classic to see. I've also been quite interested in visiting. The names entirely escape me now. Sort of some of the regions of Southeast Asia have been like ones that I've done like some reading on lately, and that would be like really cool to see
Mhm.
that, especially because like a lot less of it is known due to like obviously like the specific history there, where a lot of like records were
Yeah.
like deliberately destroyed or whatever. So it's like, what can you see that's still there is like an interesting thing to work with and think about. But yeah, like it's definitely something I want to do more of.
Yeah, of course. And look, this podcast is kind of about the weird, and we see the weird in a positive light. Like the weird is the new wonderful. But I also love to ask the guests who comes here that make this wonderful, weird creations and adventures, and you do this especially well. So, what I'd like to ask is, how do you define the weird for yourself, and how do you seek that in your work and in your life in general?
Um, it's an odd one because I think like a lot of the stuff I'm into is kind of like broadly regarded as like weird shit. like everything's kind of from like my music tastes. Like my wife's always like, oh, why do you like this? So like a lot of the books I'm reading, like I've always, I think like even like as a kid, like partially due to exposure to like alternative stuff, but I was never like interested in like what was in TV or like the books that were like age appropriate or whatever. Like it's always like, what if it was like aggressively weird? What if it like was trying to make me uncomfortable? Like a big one was like picking up the first edition of Warhammer 40,000 because my dad was really into this stuff before. And the art in
Wow.
that is like super hardcore, like lots of like black and white, like horrible mutilated bodies and all this like cool stuff. And I think that was like, I was like, oh my god, like it doesn't have to be what's on TV or like on the radio. Like there's like a whole other world here. And I was like, I just kind of have always wanted more and more of that. And like getting older, you just kind of get the freedom to do that and find more people who are into the same like weird shit. Yeah, like it's kind of like it's also, I think because it's the weird stuff is always, it doesn't need to be defined in like opposition to like mainstream or whatever, but it's like there's often at least like a kind of disinterest there, which I think kind of spoke to me as well, where it is just kind of like I'm just off doing my own thing, and like if people want to see it, great, and if not, no worries as well. Like see you around.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's like
that's a
it's a
great
big
approach.
question.
Yeah.
Yeah, because yeah, I think if you set yourself in opposition to, then it's kind of like you end up as defined by the main course
Yeah,
as not, right? Like whereas if you're just off doing your own
that's
thing,
true.
then you kind of get to forge your own path, which is like fun. Like I always joke about doing things the hard way on purpose, but like part of that is true. Like part of it is like, like the big example I always use, like I used to hate writing magic items, so I wrote 100 of them for and treasure, and now I can. It's fine. It doesn't bother me anymore, which is like the hardest solution, but it was like the one that I wanted to do, sort of thing.
Yeah, but maybe I think I do that too. Maybe we do what is uncomfortable because not to be contrarian as you said, but we find ourselves through facing those struggles, those difficulties. It's a way for to explore authenticity because I think that's what it is. It's not being in opposition to what is normal. It's just being authentic and comfortable in being whatever it is that you. If you're different, if you're like everybody else, I don't know. Just be who you are in a way that's comfortable for you and you find it interesting. So, and sometimes we find it interesting facing these challenges to really find out what is that we do, our creativity, and how we can do these things better, right?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I think
Uh,
that's spot on. Where it is that like, yeah, like a self challenge almost, and like you can do that in any field. Like sometimes it's like again, like even with music, like I like quite extreme music, and sometimes it's like, oh man, this is a bit too extreme for me, so I'll listen to the album and see how I feel by the end of it, sort of thing.
yeah.
But like still being able to hopefully appreciate it, even if it's not for you as well.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it is coming to stuff at where it's at, like rather than trying to like impose your own kind of set of values or like orders onto something, just being like, oh okay, like what does this prioritize, like what is this
Yeah.
interested in, and like if the thing it's interested in is like a 20-second song, great, they achieved that, they did really good job or something. Yeah, and I think that's part
Yeah.
of it as well. Like there's a kind of willingness to let somebody else show you what they're doing and being like, oh cool, like, and even if the, not for me, but thanks for showing me, sort of thing. And that's something I've always tried to do, like
Exactly. Yeah.
in real life. It's just like, oh, like what are you into? Like, and most people will have like a thing that's like, oh, that's interesting. Tell me about it.
Yeah. Absolutely. And do you have any kind of maybe creative ritual or anything that you do before you start writing or working on your projects? Maybe put some music, put your shoes on, something that helps you get into the mood of your creative work.
I mean, depending on how well things are flowing or not. Like if I'm like in the zone, like I when I was working a more conventional job, like a big thing was like I'd wake up an hour early, put something on the vinyl player, and just write for an hour before I had to start work properly, which was like that was really nice. Whereas now, like the more common thing I'll do is just turn the internet off. So I've got
Mm.
like an extender right by my foot to kind of kick the switch, turn that off, and just kind of like isolate myself a bit. Like I've got kind of music ready to go, just yeah, turn it off and just work away at whatever it is I'm trying to do for an hour or two, to really like kind of knuckle down and get it done. Um, it
Why
is
do you turn
definitely
the internet
oh,
off?
it's because otherwise I'll be like, oh, I'll just go research that, and then I'll fall down like a Wikipedia hole, and it's like an hour later. I'm like, fuck, shit,
Yeah.
I didn't get anything done. So for me, just if the internet's off and I don't even think to look it up, I'll just like put something there like, oh, I'll come back to this, no worries, and just carry on. I don't need to know the answer right now. So I'll have like a paper thesaurus and stuff like sort of above my desk, like
Oh
so
yeah.
it's just there. Like I don't need to Google it, and it's like sure it takes longer, but it means I'm not opening myself up to being so easily distracted, which is like a big thing. I try and like be very deliberate about having focus. It's something that like bothers
Yeah.
me when I can't focus on something, and the big problem is computers. Like if I'm reading a book, it's fine. That is the other thing sometimes as well is I'll every now and then just write out the thing I'm working on by hand, rather than using the computer because again, there's
Yes.
no distractions in a notebook. It's you just write in the notebook. That's all you can do. So you just do it, which works really well for me. Kind of removing the possibility of doing something else.
Yeah, and I read about this too, that writing by hand, since it's kind of the slowest way for you to take a note or something, you memorize it more because you take more time to do it. You think it more truthfully. So if you're trying to study or memorize or think about something, yeah, it is better to write by hand because to help you to focus. So that's all very good strategies. And now I'm thinking about maybe turning off the internet when I sit down to write something. That's a very good idea. Maybe not maybe just for me, like in my computer, just turn it off because the rest of the family will want to, the kid wants
Yeah,
to watch YouTube and whatever. So yeah. But that's a great idea. Thank you for that.
yeah. It's just one thing that I realized. I was like, I'm just spending so much time googling stuff. Like, just don't. You don't need to know it right now. Like, just
Yeah.
take a note, come back to it later. Like, because especially because my previous job was quite like low intensity in some ways. So like if I had like a few minutes here and there, it's like, oh, I'll just quickly do the research I meant to do. So like I had lots of time to fill with little bits like that. Whereas like the time where I can knuckle down, focus, and not worry about distractions, that's like quite precious. So take maximum advantage, sort of thing.
Yeah. You mentioned, your previous job, and you don't have to talk about it if you don't want to, but who is gearing outside of RPGs? Like, do you still have a secret identity job outside of role playing games that you do? And because that's how I
So
refer to my job. Like, I go to my job and, oh, this is my secret identity. Like, this is not me,
yeah,
but it's
yeah.
yeah.
So I used to do cybersecurity for it was about 7 years that I did cybersecurity stuff for two big companies. One of them like we kind of sold our services elsewhere, and the most recent one was for a budget hotel chain in the UK. Nothing super high stakes, nothing exciting or dangerous. So that was what I was doing for 7 years. But obviously, as Sean put out, I'm now working for Tuesday Night Games full time. So it's just all RPGs now, which has been like
Nice.
a weird adjustment because the thing that used to be like my main hobby is now my job, and I
Yeah.
need
How was
to I need to
how
make
was
sure I have
that?
stuff to do that isn't RPGs. So that's like an ongoing process where it's like I just need to be very deliberate about it. Like I'm still running my games for my friends because there's always have been quite divorced. Like it's like my friends who I know in real life we play like sort of twice a week. That doesn't interfere with the day job as it were. But there's like especially like over the weekends, like if my wife's away or whatever, I'm kind of sitting there like I can't write all weekend because I'm doing that all week. So like I need to make sure I'm doing something.
Yeah.
I don't just want to get back into just playing video games or anything. Like I want to make sure I'm doing stuff interesting. So once the weather gets
Yeah.
better, my parents got me like a barbecue thing for Christmas. It's like a big fireball barbecue thing. So I'll probably get really into that. And just trying new like different things because I've got time back in a way. Because yeah,
Yeah.
it's the day job now, which is it's weird that a job has given me more time, but there you go.
Yeah. That's something I worry about. I thought for a while and maybe trying to just live off games, but I was worried that turning something that I love or that I do, for pleasure, that I even though I make some money off it, you know, making this the sole breadwinner for me, I was afraid to spoil it in a way. I
Yeah,
don't know if you have
definitely.
that fear, and as you talked, like you maybe probably needs like a hobby outside of role playing games, and that's one of the questions I asked here too. If you have a hobby outside it, but that's something you are seeking because your hobby was this, right? And now you're
Yeah,
going through this transition and having to find someone else to distract you for your hobby kind of work, right? And helps you also have ideas, explore your creativity outside of needing to make money out of it, right?
for sure. Like it was never like the only thing I was doing, but it was definitely like I was spending a lot of my free time kind of writing, and like kind of thinking about games and playing them. So there's a lot of like like me and my friends will also do like a lot of board games and stuff, but I want to make sure I have stuff that's like sufficiently divorced from games where it can still be like enriching, because I think you can only be as good as your influences to some degree, so it's important to make sure
Yeah,
that you don't silo yourself and just consume games stuff, because then everything you
for
make is
sure.
derivative of games, and it's
Yeah,
you get
yeah,
to like a
yeah.
weird problem where things kind of second order, like not truly original, whereas you kind of want to be able to come up with like those fresh new ideas
Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
combinations, which
I,
needs
th-
rich influences.
I think that's for
So
all kinds of art, right? Like if you're a writer, if you're a movie maker, anything, you have to differentiate your sources, right? Have a very varied input so your output can be richer, I would say.
oh, absolutely, yeah, yeah. No, I mean it's such a like kind of classic truism, right? That like yeah, you can't if you make movies, you gotta go read books, or you gotta go and watch plays. You can't just be films all the time. You gotta really vary it, and I think possibly especially in games, because I think a lot of games are so directly inspired by other forms of media that
Yeah.
you end up kind of very quickly like kind of end up in a very shallow pool of inspiration there, where it's kind of like, oh, this is like this game's inspired by this media property, and then if I'm inspired by that, you've kind of immediately got the problem where there's a lack of fresh ideas. Like a lot of the reading I do is like very not directly gameable. Like I had like a big phase into like very weird philosophy stuff, and turning any of that gameable was like fun and difficult, because it wasn't directly related at all. So that was like good fun, and like yeah, challenging
What
in a
was this
satisfying way.
very weird philosophical
Oh,
stuff that you
there's
were
there's
reading?
there's like a few. Like a big one that I got into a few years ago was a Spinal Catastrophism, which is an absolutely wild book. Which is it's hard to summarize. It kind of is taking the spine as a like historical record, of all the different kind of like levels of and things that have happened to humanity, and it gets into all kinds of like weird stuff. Like it kind of at the preface, it's saying like this is taking not necessarily true ideas, but seeing what they can show us anyway. So it gets into like weird kind of like alternate like evolutionary routes for humans. It gets into like UFOs, talking about
Wow.
like weird kind of like political formations. It kind of throws it all together in a really compelling and like interesting way. Like I really love that book. It's fantastic. And yeah, it's just like constantly throwing new things at you, like weird angles of thought, which is just like, oh, okay, like I think I get it.
Yeah.
And there's
Yeah.
like another one that's like I think it's like the phenomenology of a vampire squid. And it's like, what is the mind of a vampire squid like? It tries to relate like how human is it, how non-human is it, and kind of what shared context do we have. So there's a lot of like people doing very interesting thinking out there,
Oh yeah.
um, which is just very outside of the norm, and is just fun to engage with and kind of think about and then try and apply somewhere else. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah. And all these things sometimes just trigger something in our imagination. So yeah, maybe I can explore that and maybe use this weird octopus in an adventure. Maybe the way they reproduce or the way they do something you steal and make things weirder for your games too. And I don't know.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It's always hard to turn the creative mind off, right? As you watch those things and read about it, you're always you feel like that. You're always seeking how you can
Oh yeah,
use
it's
those things.
terrible.
Yeah,
Yeah, like you'd
yeah,
be like, "Oh, this film's great. I could turn it into such a cool campaign." And it's like,
yeah.
just enjoy the
Yeah,
film as a film first.
yeah. Yeah, and sometimes I feel like, stop doing that. Enjoy the fucking film. Why are you
Yeah,
thinking about games right now? You're like, just enjoy. You can think about it after, but it's sometimes you
yeah,
can't
you can't
stop.
turn it
Yeah,
off. It's like sometimes it's like fine, like okay, I guess that's how we're analyzing things today.
yeah,
Yeah, it's very funny because, like you say, it isn't something you get a choice about. Sometimes it's happening.
yeah. You mentioned inspiration too, and one thing I always ask guests here because it's something that affects me. So I ask, have you ever been inspired, or have you are you inspired by maybe an artist, creator, or writer? Can be from any genre, any media, not necessarily role playing games. That maybe you model the way they approach their craft or the way they position themselves in the community. In a way that's like, have you had any mentors, even though they might not have sit down to teach you, but have you studied the work of some creators and tried to model them to arrive at your own style, or your own way to do things?
There's like I think about Steve Albini a lot, who was a record producer and he's in a couple of bands. Like he has a very kind of workman-like approach to a lot of things, but he also is like very unabashed about the things he likes. Like he has this famous quote, was like, "I like fucking noise. I want it loud, and I don't care if you kind of like it." And that was like a yeah, like he knows what he wants to do, and like the people who hire him knows what he's gonna do, and he won't meet them in the middle. Like if you hire me, it's because you want the thing that I do well.
Yeah.
So he's like a guy I think about a lot, and I think he's very interesting. I'm trying to think if there's anyone else that's like an immediate kind of like, oh, of course, this person. He's the one that I always go back to. I think in a big
Nice.
way,
Yeah.
like in terms of approach to his craft.
And does he talk a lot about this, how he approached his craft?
Yeah, well,
Where did you
because
learn
he's
about the way he does things?
so I got into one of his bands, Shellac, which is like definitely the best one of his bands in my opinion. And from there, just started reading about the guy, and kind of he has like, as I say, he does talk about it, but it's always very like straight and matter of the fact and quite prosaic, where it's just kind of like, yeah, you just turn up
Yeah.
and you do your job, and like you ask them what they want and that kind of thing. It's not, he doesn't sort of pontificate upon it in the way that like some artists will, where they're kind of talking more about like a muse or whatever. For him, it seems very much like I'm solving problems, which I always really liked and really appreciated, as like perhaps almost because it's like countervailing to the general kind of way artists will speak about themselves, where they will talk about like
Uh,
cultivating artist spirit. And like I read
that's a very design way to approach art, like solving problems. But it's very how you learn about game design is about, you have a problem and you analyze it and you come up with a solution, and it's not really normally how artists see art, right? It's just exploring an idea.
yeah, well, I think it's because it's partially because it's countervailing, partially because it's like, oh, like what happens if you think about things that way, but also because
Yeah,
it's not like the default, right? Like the default is kind of like you're channeling like something else and kind of
yeah,
just trying to put it on the page without yourself getting in the way. Like, because there is the kind of like very much like, oh, art is constructed by like the skill of the artist idea, which like okay, sure, fine, like you have to have craft. But there is also the like I think it's Jack Spicer has this thing about Martians sending him his poems like directly to his brain. Um, and they're just like the stuff in his head is the furniture that they move around. And it's not like literally Martians, but the point being he's like trying to remove himself, like himself as himself as much as possible from the creative act, and like being surprised by his own work, which I find really interesting, where it's not like an intricate, like because you have something like Ulysses, right? Like it's like, oh, it's this big kind of puzzle, and it's all very intricate and put together in a specific way. And this is like the total opposite of that, where it is like, oh, like I don't know what it's about. Like I can think about it and talk to you about what it's about, but like I don't know in an objective way, which is like, see, probably like Jack Spicer's stuff is like the opposite, because I quite like having the two aspects in opposition and in tension. Like it's the whole idea of like healthy tension, right? Where it's like
Yeah.
if these two things are true at the same time, what does that do? What does that mean? And kind of allowing that mutual incompatibility to try and sort of drive things where like, like simultaneously solving the problems of how best do I present a dungeon whilst also trying to be like, how do I write this thing in such a way that I'm surprised and kind of happy at what I find there rather than being too there in the process. And that's like an enjoyable tightrope to walk, I think.
Oh yeah. I think it's always this balance between opposing things that makes things interesting, because you're always trying to find out what will happen and creates the uncertainty. It has a structure because both those things imply certain narrative, but because they're like opposite to each other, you create suspense in a way, and interesting in that way, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
Like it's
No.
because you can feel like if a project's leaning too far, like sort of one way or the other. And this isn't the only tension. Like there's also things where like, do you want to be specific or do you want to be like inspirational? It's obviously you want to be both, but sometimes those two things are in opposition. Where it's like if I give
Yeah.
you the precise measurements of this door, sure you know the precise measurements of the door, but you're less likely to imagine the door in some ways. Whereas if I can just tell you like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
it's like a not a spooky door, but you know what I mean, like kind of describe the
Yeah.
feeling of seeing the door, then I'm going to build the image in your head much more efficiently. But sometimes you need those specific measurements. And again, that's like a fun tension to hold.
Yeah. It's a mark of a very good writer, as you said, to know when you do one and when you do the other, when you are really specific, because that will also help you tell a story, will help you establish the characters, will help you even people become more familiarized, because sometimes familiarity isn't, being this is applicable to everything, but it is so specific that you also can recognize that experience or that thing in yourself, even though you haven't lived through it. I think that's fiction does a lot of that. I think.
No, yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Like I think the
Yeah.
specificity thing, where it's like you can almost hit something truer by being so specific. Like I think if you try and talk generally in looking a lot of fiction stuff, you end up if you it becomes so non-specific that it kind of becomes nothing. It's kind of just an
Yeah.
empty cloud that looks like something. But like if it's really specific and really concrete, then like we can kind of read it as like,
Yeah.
oh, this is like a thing that exists, and I can relate to it
Yeah.
as a thing that
It,
exists, even though it doesn't capture my general experience. It's like I still recognize it on some level, and I think that's like
yeah.
a good thing to do in
Yeah.
writing, like generally.
It's like those fantasy settings that sometimes it's just like, well, okay, another one with elves in the forest, dwarfs in the mountains, and orcs in the dungeons, and it has some, like, for me, I'm sorry to say, but it's kind of Forgotten Helms. Forgotten Helms tried to be so much, and everything is in there. And when I think about Forgotten Helms, I can't picture an image that, oh, this setting is about this, because it's so much. But if I think about maybe Dark Sun, I have a much clearer and specific and also immersive view of the setting than Forgotten Helms, because it has a very strong. It is about something. It's about this. It's about struggle. It's about scarcity. It's about fight for survival. It's about fight for equality in a way, and Forgotten Helms is
Yeah, it's
about
like
everything. So it's about
yeah,
nothing in a
it's
way.
nothing. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's too permissive, right? Like it's so wide that it stops existing. Like it's like how if you compress like a gas, you can kind of like see the color. And if it's too diffuse, nothing. It's nothing.
Yeah.
It's invisible.
Hello, weirdos, this is Diogo Nogueira, and I'm back with a word from our sponsors. Me! I just released a new game called Sawyers, in which you play a dinosaur space ranger who protects the galaxy from evil threats such as slime bankers, undead pirates, and Cosmosaurus from a void dimension. It's a game with a runes light system inspired by Forged in the Dark and Lasers and Feelings. It comes with a bunch of tables for you to generate content for it. If you know my games, they're really easy to play and they have tools to help you improvise and play with low prep. It's an ideal game for one-shots, short campaigns, and introducing new people to the hobby, and it's a really perfect family game. I play with my kids all the time. It's a game inspired by Saturday morning cartoons. It's really well illustrated by Lucas Kowalski from Poland, and with a great layout by Guilherme Gontijo. It's a really fun game. You should check it out on DriveThruRPG, itch.io, or exclusively in print on exaltedfurniture.com. I have many other games there, check them out. All the links are in the show notes, so click there. And let's get back to Weird with our chat.
Look, do you identify any kind of mark or style or voice in your work? And if you do, can you tell us a little bit what do you see that kind of unifies or ties your work, and if someone would see and think, yeah, this is Ruggierin's work?
I mean, the big one, when I'm being mean about myself, I say it's all Cormac McCarthy fan fiction, where I'm just trying to use as few words as possible. Like, a big thing I really like in his work is that he doesn't tend to express the interiority of his characters. It's just like, here's what's here. Like, I'm just writing down the stuff that happened and what's there, and the rest of it's kind of on you. And I find that like really interesting and aspirational. Where it is just like, yeah, I'm just going to tell you what's there and leave everything else out. In terms of like other like kind of like thematic markers, I think, like I said before, like kind of history and geography, like the big ones. Like, there's like a physical place and there's like a history that happened. Generally they all tend to be pretty miserable. I think I've done like a couple of funny ones, but even those have like a slightly nasty edge to them. Like the Big Squirm, like, it's funny, it's about big scarf worms that eat people. But there's also like kind of an angle of like kind of organized crime and like a kind of an assassination campaign. So yeah, I think there's always a more or less kind of degree of unpleasantness in everything I write. Which, like, maybe that's the thing I need to challenge myself and try and do something nice next time. We'll see.
But do you see yourself as someone more see the world through a more critical lens? Do you is this a reflection on how you see the world, or do you feel more positive? But I also see a lot that adventures need conflict, and sometimes is just a fantasy of us to like this bleak world and characters go there and try to survive and make it on their own, because it's kind of the way you said, like, you like to explore challenges to see what you make, what you create out of it. So maybe that reflects on your work too. You create really challenging and miserable things to see what can be created out of this thing. Do you see any relation in that?
There's definitely something there, I think, to it, where it's like, if the world's already good, like for a game, if the world's already good, then you're just kind of policeman. You're just maintaining the status quo. Whereas if there's like bad stuff in the world, like there is in the real world, then like the choice to try and make things better is a choice. And it's like you have to do something. You can't just do nothing and kind of wait. That said, I also think, like, certainly for me, a lot of like the really horrible stuff, it's kind of funny as well.
It is,
like
in a way.
You hit a point where it's like so over the top and so miserable that it's funny at that point, and you're like, oh yeah, like the horrible brain slugs are like eating all the orphans or something, and it's like, oh, like it hits a point where it flips back around. I was like, this is so ridiculous that it just kind of becomes farcical.
Yeah.
I think in terms of like, because I think I'm generally a relatively like positive person, but I think some of that is maintaining awareness of the world, and like, there's definitely a lot of things wrong at the moment, to put it mildly. But I think you can view them critically,
but it's unfair too, because today we can be aware of everything that's going on all around the world, and there's always terrible things. There have always been, not just now. And just now we have big news covering big wars, But I think every time there is terrible wars going on, and sometimes we don't know and we're fine about it. But now, just because the TV is showing, or like it's terrible, it is terrible. But it is also we seek terrible news so much, and
Yeah, well, I
it
mean,
is, yeah,
it's yeah. There's like because there is the general statistic is that as like violent crime goes down, reporting on it goes up, right? Because it sells. If it bleeds, it leads, right? That's the kind of the newspaper angle, and I think a lot of that's been so productized and commercialized as part of like 24/7 news cycles and stuff.
yeah,
And like stuff with like the atrocities happening during the stuff that's happening at the moment, like it absolutely does need to be reported on. I think
yeah, oh, yeah,
part of being a global citizen, as it were, is like you kind of have, if you have access to that knowledge, you almost sometimes you can feel like you have a duty to know, which I don't know. Like you should, if you can do something, I think you should try and do something. Obviously, there's points where you can and you can't do something. Like a big one for me was like during the COVID lockdowns in the UK, like, and there was like all the time they were like telling you, oh, the numbers gone up, and like it's like, well, I don't need to know that. Like me knowing that doesn't change my actions. I'm respecting the lockdown, so like I did hit a point then where I was like, I'm just not going to check the news anymore. There's no like I'm not, at least on this specific topic, like there's no value to me
mm.
knowing the number creeping up right now. Like there has to be an accounting at the end, obviously, and what
Oh yeah.
happened and why and who's responsible in
But you
terms of like
also
why didn't we
have to
do
be
enough.
aware of what is good for you and what is not, because
Yeah,
yeah, that can make you worse, that can make you anxious, that can make you, and then you forget the cares you have to take because you're all focusing on this bad news all the time, and maybe you
yeah.
forget to do what you need to do. So
It's that tension, right? You have to be able to look after yourself and touch grass and be like, I exist in this place in this like world, but also I should be aware and do what I can for stuff happening further away as well. Like you can't set yourself to keep you can't set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm, um, but you should try and help them. It's like give them a blanket,
oh
as it
yeah,
were.
yeah,
Like both again, two sort of things have to be true at the same time.
yeah. Look, what has been maybe the weirdest game you ever played, or maybe if not the weirdest, a weird game you played recently that maybe made an impression on you and made you think, maybe in different ways games can work, and it can be role
Um,
playing games, it can be video games, and it can be board games, and it can be just a play you do with your friends in like a LARP or something.
so like two big role playing game experiences that stick out in my mind is there was for one of my friends' birthdays, I was running. I think it was Cthulhu Dark that we were running. And me and a very good friend as well, best man at the wedding. We didn't tell the person whose birthday it was, but we just started swapping who was GM in the middle of like talking. And he was very fucked up by that. So that was like a really fun one where it's like if you can kind of call into question like the actual player roles, you do something very interesting there. Where it like if you rug pull that, and then everyone's kind of like I don't know where I'm standing, which for a horror game, fantastic because like you want everyone to feel on edge, not sure what on earth is
Yeah.
happening. So that was really good fun as like a big one. The other one that I always remember is we were again weirdly playing Call of Cthulhu, and it was a pre-published scenario, but basically it turns out like one character had like many lives living within his head of everyone else, and it was trapped in a time loop, and like this awful thing was going to happen, and like your options were either like let the thing happen, or if I were content one of this one, or just like kill yourself. And those were like the character's choices, and it ended up with all of my friends effectively in a circle around me, all yelling at me, "You need to kill yourself," which was extremely intense as a scenario. But again, it's one
Yeah.
that I'm always like, damn, like that was
Wow.
like, and they talk about like bleed in LARPs, and it was like, yeah, that was like a lot to go through. Like we all laughed about it afterwards because like we're all friends, very comfortable with each
Yeah.
other. But it was in the moment, I was like, fucking hell, this is an odd one. Um, in terms of board games, one I come back to a lot is Psycho Raiders, which is like a horror movie simulator board game. but it uses like hex and counter wargame mechanics, which I love this game. I think it's great. Where if you're playing as the survivors, you've got terrible odds. But it's a really good like little story generator where like you have to kind of process everything through the rules as much as you can because it's a board game. We agree to follow the rules. It's not like a role playing game where they're tools. And it just
Yeah.
generates fantastic little moments by
What's
putting
the
something
name?
that Psycho Raiders. But yeah, the fact it uses like a war game chassis to do a horror movie, it's like two things that on the face of it, like that doesn't work, that doesn't make sense, and then you play it, and it's like, oh shit, this is incredible, this is really fun. So that's one I
Yeah,
always I always come back to as like in terms of board games. It's really good fun.
yeah, I see nowadays constantly games like board games drawing for RPGs. So there are board games that really plays with telling stories and playing characters, and also RPGs are drawing a lot from board games on how to structure rules to have the way you play the game kind of in a structured way, like a board game. You have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Those games that are more like telling stories, and I
Yeah.
think that's helping. Like we're exploring the limits of the hobby. You mentioned a few minutes ago how if you just study role playing games or games, you become limited because it is a medium that is really recent and haven't been explored the way literature or music or the mediums that are older than ours have. And for a while our reference was these other mediums, like in the 80s and 90s. The late 80s and 90s was really all about this idea of telling stories. The gem is there like to tell this epic, and the adventures were really linear, and it was really reference on literature. But now we're starting to see the media can do a lot more, and indie RPGs are exploring these different possibilities. So I think that's also very healthy. And do you have anything you would like to explore, or any kind of a dream project or a weird thing that you think about exploring in future projects?
Oh, that's a tough one. Um, I just wanted to expand on the what you were saying with kind of the way games have changed from like the 80s, 90s, kind of early aughts as well, if that's all right. Because I think we're hitting like a big explosion of like styles of play to the point
Yeah,
where like role playing games are almost not a useful term anymore. Like there's like you can look at
that's true.
like
Yeah,
a very kind of like linear trad style and like I don't know something very experimental, weird, like a kind of nothing immediately springs to mind, but there's almost like a lack of like it's almost like the shared language holds back comparing them. Like they're both cool role playing games, but in terms of practicality and what you're actually
yeah,
doing, they're like so different. Like a GMless game compared to a very much like a linear trad, like here's the adventure book we're playing through it beginning to end. Like they're so divorced as to be like I don't know which one should be called a role playing game. We just abandon the term and start using a whole bunch of different terms. So it's very interesting how like it's like saying, "Oh, I like sports." Now saying role playing games, like yeah, like which one? And it was like
yeah,
if I'm playing football and you're playing tennis, and we're trying to talk about the same thing, we're gonna have a very weird conversation that's not going to be the most useful. Whereas if it's like we both know that we're talking about different sports and comparing them, oh, cool, that's really interesting. Like there's a weird crossover there, or oh man, that's totally different. So it's like an interesting one with the
yeah,
explosion and change of tone in games. In terms of weird projects I want to work on, at some point I want to do another just silly big one like Wolves, just because it was really good fun to write. I keep thinking about I bought and read the Masks of Nathaliotep slipcase, the big KSEM adventure, and it's not great. It's pretty overwritten in my opinion. So at some point I want to do my take on a big kind of not I wouldn't run it linear, but like a big kind of campaign length adventure that still has like one kind of narrative thrust to it. Like there isn't specifically a sandbox, just because I've done the sandbox thing now. I want to see what I would do with something that isn't linear but has like a you're doing this thing, go. Um,
yeah.
that's one thing I really want to
Like a
experiment with
meta
more.
plot or something. That's there
Yeah,
is this
some
setting, but
way
there
of
is this main thing that's happening that's affecting the group, and they will have to deal one end or the other, or it will deal with them in a way, right?
Yeah, for sure. Or even just like one thing I was talking about with a friend is like just giving the players like a job. Like here's the sandbox, but like you have a job, you work for somebody, and that's like that doesn't change. We've agreed that's working. That's what's happening. So like
Yeah.
go and do something about it. Because I think that's especially for players who are a bit less like kind of confident in the sandbox format. I think that can be really useful. Just being like I ran like when I ran Warhammer Fantasy, it was like, okay, you are witch hunters. Like that's the campaign. Like if you don't like it, this isn't the campaign for you. But they were all like, yeah, no, sounds cool. Like that sounds fun.
Hmm.
And it worked really well because it was like whenever they weren't sure what to do, it's like, well, I guess we're gonna hunt witches. It's really good fun.
Yeah, it's a great idea. And it functions because it focuses the campaign. It always gives them a motivation, and especially from players that are not really super familiar with all different kinds of games we play, like indie games. Having this very you are this, you're going to do this, and like your mission is that gives them like a direction. But they can also explore outside of it because people on the job always do something different too. So
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, like it gives you a good balance.
Yeah.
Like my ideal is still here's a big sandbox. You go find the interesting thing you want to do, but that's not right for every table, and it's like worth having tools in your toolbox for different kinds of players.
Yeah. Look, now we're getting about in the middle of the episode, and I normally switch to more personal questions. And I would like to begin asking about maybe weird experiences you might have had in your life that made you rethink the way you do things or rethink your feelings and your thoughts. Like, have you ever had experience with deep meditation or hypnosis or maybe out of body experiences that made you, I don't know, see reality in a different way?
Um, I've never done like a successful like deep meditation, but I do like try and meditate sort of semi regularly. I mean, the ideal is once a day, but we're getting there. That's very interesting. Realizing how much kind of like background noise there is in your mind. Like the kind of disordered clutter of thinking. I can't remember where I read a quote somewhere that like most people are sleepwalking most of the time, and the idea is like if you're not thinking about the thing you're doing, you're not really doing it.
Yes.
Which kind of ruined podcasts for me in some ways because then it's like, like obviously like if you're driving or like doing whatever, like it's but like there's a uh the idea that yeah you should be thinking about what you're doing all the time and like it's exhausting to live that way, but it is very rewarding. Like I remember I had one really
Yeah.
good day where everything I was doing, I was 100% engaged in just the thing I was doing. There wasn't any kind of distracting background thoughts, and like even washing the dishes like after dinner was like really like it just felt great to do it because I was like I'm washing the dishes, I'm doing it really well. I put them away. What do I want to do now? And rather than having like something buzzing around in my head, I was like I'm going to dot dot dot. I'm going to read this book because I want to, and that's it. Like it's total absorption in every act. It was incredible, and that's like
Yeah.
kind of my gold standard for what a good day looks like now, which is hard to
Yes.
achieve. Like it's a lot of work.
It is very difficult. Like even like watching TV and not checking your phone, for me it's like it's a training that I do and I put my phone away. My even enjoying like the shows and I like comedies a lot, and sometimes I'm watching something and I have to check some message, some email, and I lose so much. And it's very true. Like this training of mindfulness, to be present in the moment and then just enjoy and take the most of it. It's it's difficult, I think, especially nowadays or depending how your mind works. And I can imagine doing this a full day like this. It's
Yeah, so
it's
it was
very
a
hard, but it
really
must be
nice day.
very rewarding. Yeah.
The
Yes.
big thing that I did for that is I've got like a drug dealer's phone as my main phone, so that I
Mm.
don't get it doesn't have any good apps on it, so I don't get
For
distracted.
the weirdos who aren't watching this, drug dealer's phone is like the old phone with buttons instead of
It's an old Nokia.
the screen. Yeah, yeah,
So like yeah, all of my wife hates it. Her friends thinks it's some they're split. Some of them think it's cool. My friends hate it because they hate when I do weird stuff, which is it's also fun to annoy them by doing weird stuff.
yeah. have you had this phone for a long while, or is this something recent
I
that
think it's about half
you
a year
bought?
I've had it for
Oh
now
yeah,
because I got it.
you got it because
Must
of
be over
that,
half a
because of
year.
distraction, right? Or why did you
Yeah,
got
well,
that
like, my
one?
old phone was on the way out, and I'd been kind of toying with the idea anyway. And I was like, you know what? I'll just pull the trigger. I'll try it, and I'm loving it. Like, it's great. You can't do a lot on it, and that's ideal because I only need it to stay in contact with people if I'm out, basically, because I work from home.
Yeah,
And if I need to look up directions, I just look them up ahead of time and write them down. It's fine. It's
yeah,
it was how people used to get around. It wasn't that
yeah.
bad.
Very old school.
Yeah, it's nice. It's and like I think if you're this is a big thing in video games, right? Where if they have a little mini map with a compass on it, you just stare at the compass
Yes.
because the arrow tells you where to go. Whereas if you have to actually like look and be like, "Oh, turn left at the tree," it's like there's the tree. I'm in that world a lot more, right? And you can do that.
Oh yeah,
You can do that with real life as well. Like you just look at your sat nav. You don't look at what's going on around you and like, oh, read a road sign. Okay, I'm going this way, going that way. And the same thing when you're walking. If you're looking at the phone telling you where to go, you're not
oh
looking
yeah,
at the road names and like thinking about like, oh, I wonder where that road name comes from. Like you're entirely shut off from that. Which is like, yeah, that's a big thing I've been working on the past couple of years. Is like, yeah, being in the world and like paying attention. Because it's so easy to get distracted, especially like as a kid growing up on computers a lot. I now have like a much deeper appreciation of everything that isn't computers.
oh yeah,
Just anything real is like, yeah, like that's inherently superior. Like the computer's fine, but it can't be the beginning and end of
yeah.
everything. It has to be a supplement.
I'm sorry to ask you that, but how old are you, and when did you had this realization of living in the moments? Because you seem young, and having
No,
this
it's fine.
wisdom is
I'm
is very
29.
rare. Wow.
So I think I started getting like serious about this stuff. Probably maybe like a couple of years ago is when I like started actually like, actively doing it. But like
But what made
maybe yeah,
you
2 or 3 years.
be serious about this?
So it would have been about 26, 27 is when I started like, okay, like I'll buy the fucking meditation cushion and I'll sit on it and I'll see what happens. Like, I'll try and not always have a podcast on. Like I'll like, no, I won't die if I don't have earphones in when I walk the dog in the morning. Like I'll just let my brain wake up a little bit before I start blasting it with like
Oh yeah.
whatever's happening wherever. It's and like there's ways to approach stuff where it's like there's like thoughtful ways of listening to a podcast where you're like engaging and you're listening, and then there's like for me especially, and this might just be me with like auditory processing, but like if I have it on in the background, it's like in one ear out the other, like I don't absorb anything. But some people that's like listening to a lecture, they learn the whole thing. For me, I've got to write it down or read it, or else it's not going. It's gone. I'm not handling that information.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's like the biggest kind of mode shift for me, like in recent years. Trying
You
to think
just
of any
had the
other kind of.
awareness that you were not
I
taking
just wasn't
full
happy
advantage
with.
of
Yeah,
things you're doing, right? Yeah.
and again, it might have been COVID as well, because like cooped up inside, like realizing you've not been outside for weeks, and like being like,
Yeah.
oh, I'll just go start taking walks. And it's like, oh wow, I feel so much better. I'm no longer like stressed out as hell. Like crazy how that works, right? And
Oh
it's
yeah.
like
I
that was
love a
another
good
big moment
walk.
where I was
Yeah.
like, it's one thing knowing on like an intellectual level that like going outside is good for you and walks are good for you, but actually like hitting the point where you need to, like you don't forget that. You never forget how you felt, um,
Yes.
and how much better you felt for deliberately taking steps. So it's like looking after your mind as well as that is
Yes.
like yeah, very important to me.
I was talking to Lex Mandrake yesterday, and we were talking about how important and how it is that we do exercise and stuff. That even though we don't like it, it's not like we feel good doing it. It's that we feel worse not doing it. So it's like that's why like we're exercising, because it's
Yeah,
worse not doing it, and you you,
yeah,
you feel better.
that's a big
Like while you're doing it, it's not great. Like you're sweating, you get sore, and etc. But after and before, if you have it like a regularity, you're consistent with it. you you feel much better. Like at least I do. Like I started exercising more regularly like 6 months ago or something, and feel much better and more well disposed. I'm able to write and create every day. I wasn't being able to do that. I wasn't patient. It helps with a lot of stuff, I think.
Yeah, it's very frustrating how it's one of those ones where I'm like, oh, I guess the adults were right. Like it's
Yeah.
you feel really annoyed that it's like they were wrong about everything else, but this one thing I guess they were right about. Like yeah, I guess I should exercise. I guess I will have more energy. Like I about a year ago, I think I started doing the gym. That's been like really good for me as well. Like it's to the point now where if I don't go for a week, all my joints start locking up. It's like click
Yeah.
crunch. I'm like, do I live like this all the time, or like it's yeah, like you say, you do feel so much better afterwards, even though you're kind
Yeah.
of putting yourself through something that's like deliberately difficult. You know.
Yeah. The same thing you said before. You put yourself through some kind of struggle to feel better afterwards. In a way, I don't know. It some stuff just work this way. I guess you
Yeah,
have
it's like
to.
there's a
Yeah.
self-overcoming is like a big one that a lot of people talk about, right? Where it's like it's not even beating other people. It's like you can just
It's you.
you beat
Yeah.
yourself yesterday, sort of thing, you know. And it's each day is that incremental improvement, or not, and understanding why and being like, well, I learned something even though I didn't do better. It's like I guess I need to sleep more, or like oh, like eating such and such actually has improved my whatever, and it's like cool, okay, now I know, and it's like so I got really into like Zen texts for a while, and like a big one that it was a Western guy saying it, but he was like the treat the body and mind as a laboratory, like it's the ultimate science kit because you can just try things and see what happens. Like why not try meditating every day? Why not try going to the gym or like focusing on a single point in space for an hour and see what happens? Like you have the body,
Yeah.
like it will do something. Like try it, and that's like something I've never stopped thinking about as like a good phrase. Um, yeah, the body's a laboratory is like a big one,
Yeah.
definitely.
And have you been experienced with it? Have you? Can you share any maybe weird experiences you might have had with your body and mind to explore those things?
In terms of like the recent stuff, there's nothing like big that I'd point to beyond the like let's say that kind of like that one day of total absorption in every task. I mean, I suppose like just because it came into frame on the video, the tattoo was like because this is quite new. This is maybe
Yeah,
a
they
little
look
over a
great.
year.
Yeah.
This one, thank you. That was like very interesting because I got the whole outer sleeve done at once. So it's like 4 hours
Wow.
for my first tattoo, which was a big experience because you kind of the pain it kind of fades away in some ways. It kind of becomes this like you get so overwhelmed with it that you kind of stop being within it. It's very odd, but I definitely like think it's like an interesting experience to go through. You also
I
get
want to
such
do it, but I
a
did. Yeah,
it's
scared.
I mean it's a lot of money. I mean the pain isn't too bad. Like
Yeah,
it's a
and the
lot, but
money
it's not
too. It's
too
a
bad.
thing. Yeah.
The money's the big one, yeah. And the as soon as you get your first tattoo, you're immediately like, oh man, I can't wait for my next one, which is
Yeah.
a problem when yeah they take a lot of time and money. um, but yeah, that was another one where I've been thinking about it for years. I was like, just do it. Like, what are you waiting for? There's not going to be a better time. Just go and do it. You know, you can afford to do it
Yeah.
right now, so do it. So I did, which is great. Um, and the wife liked it, which is always important.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. For sure. And that's also one thing I like about exercise is that the wife started noticing and enjoying, and it's
Yeah, that's
great.
nice. Yeah, it's not a bad thing at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to give a so like less like deliberate, but like when I was like a dumb teenager, salvia used to be legal in the UK, which is this like extremely hardcore hallucinogenic. That's like it's not fun. Like for a lot of people, it's like a
No.
terrible time. But it
Okay.
was briefly legal in the UK for some reason, or like they just never
Hmm.
got around to banning it until after. So my friend picked that up, and that was a very interesting experience. That I don't know if I like thought about it deeply at the time, but it's like definitely an image that's like quite stuck in my mind. Where my So we were sat in my friend's front room, and like one of my friend's faces turned into like a porcelain mask. So like the outside was like porcelain, and like the
Mm-hmm.
edges were all painted in like a kind of red paint. Um, and then it got very odd when so I saw like the room and it was being carried by a big blue flaming hand, and there was like an infinity of these on a black background, and they were kind of like zooming past your vision. Um,
Wow.
that was a lot, and it's like very short and very intense. But it's the weird thing with it is you're aware some, or at least I was aware on some level that this was like the imagination. Like I could still
Yeah.
tell what was like visual input and what was being invented and kind of elaborated on top of that. But the plasticity between them, like being like, oh, I'm purely imagining this thing, but it's like it's so vivid that it almost like overrides what the eyes are seeing, or like blends with
Mm-hmm.
it so seamlessly, despite knowing that. It was very interesting realizing like you are kind of like a perception filter as like a person,
Oh
like
yeah.
you're not seeing an
We're not
objective
seeing
truth.
reality. No.
Yeah,
No.
for sure, and that was like
We
a
are
big one.
not.
I think
Yeah.
when I first encountered the idea, like then I thought back to that experience and was like, oh no, yeah, okay, cool, no questions here, like totally. Which was like a big one, I think, like in terms of changing how you think about things and see things.
Yeah.
But yeah, not so much at the time because we were like 15 or something. Like we weren't thinking that big at
Yeah.
that time. We just
Oh
thought we
yeah.
were.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Have you ever tried any other psychedelics after that? Like when you got a
I
little bit
haven't. I've
older?
not really had the opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's
I never
not.
tried when I was younger because I was afraid and super boring, all those kind of stuff. But I tried recently, and that's kind of reflections and things you see, and helps you, and at least me helped me think about stuff in a different way and have some realizations and understanding about stuff that happened to me and continue to happen. And I don't know. Yeah, I never
Oh, I think it's
I heard
definitely a
about
super powerful
salvia.
tool.
Yeah,
Definitely, I think it's great for like done in the right way with the right intention with the right
yeah.
people. I think it's so good.
That's the
It's
point, of
purely
course.
an access thing, like over here more than anything else. Not a lack of willingness.
Yeah. And talking a little bit more about now spirituality and religion and maybe philosophy. We talk a little bit about this, mindfulness and Zen. Do you have any kind of religion or spirituality or even a philosophy that helps you navigate life in general? Helps you deal with difficult situations and think through hard times. Anything like this for you?
So my family on my dad's side was raised Catholic. Whereas my mum's side is almost like anti-clerical. Which so I did like Sunday school a bit at school, but I think between that and going to a specifically like Church of England primary school, is a great combination for making sure that you don't want anything to do with the Christian church, because like unless you've already bought in, it feels very pervasive in like a kind of negative way. So sort of as a younger person, like a kind of teenager, quite like a hard atheist for a long time, whereas now I've definitely softened into a kind of agnosticism. I would say like if there is or isn't, it's kind of unknowable, and I think like a lot of that stems from like a lot of my ideas around like I don't think there is a knowable truth as such. There's just what we are here now and kind of what we perceive, and like we do get quite a lot of say in that. Like there's people who believe that their belief shapes reality, and like hey, for them it probably does. Like it's
Yeah, it
clearly
can be
having
real
some
for
sort of
them.
impact.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like you kind of is it like Robert Anton Wilson talks about like reality tunnels and stuff where like people can kind of build a tunnel of like their how they believe reality works, and like because they're burrowing through reality in their tunnel, they only see the
Yeah.
stuff in their tunnel. And he also had the idea of like pan agnosticism as well, like kind of a bit of like skeptical towards everything, which is like, but not in a skeptical towards everything, but also willing to be credulous towards anything, which is like an interesting like kind of dichotomy where it's like I don't know if that's true, but I don't know if it's not true either, and kind of like an openness to ideas. which I think is like
It's
very
curious
valid.
in
Like
kind
I
of way,
think,
right? You don't believe it's real, but you're curious to see and kind of excited to be proven wrong in a way, right? Like I don't believe in the supernatural, but I would love to see it and be proven wrong in a way, right?
yeah, no, for sure, absolutely. I mean, like with a lot of things, right, where it is just kind of like, well, I don't have a reason to think otherwise at the moment, but there is the acknowledgement of like, well, if a lot of people like are thinking something, there's clearly like something that works here, and that's always interesting. Like the
Oh,
kind of
sure.
like kind of going back to like the interest in history, there's like the plasticity of human beings. Like we've been so many different things over so many thousands of years. Like the worldview of like a Roman soldier is all, like incomprehensible to like us right now in a lot of ways. But we're both human beings, right? Like there's some stuff that we would share and understand, but there's also a lot of like beliefs and actions which are like we would now call inhumane, and it's all from the same
Yeah.
mind, which is very interesting because it's so infinitely
And
moldable.
there's a lot in common too. Like I, because of anxiety, I read a bunch about stoicism and stuff, and a lot of the stuff they would write about daily life and how to deal with anxiety and problems and personal things are completely applicable today. Like the same problems about what they are thinking, what I'm supposed to do. I have all these problems, and then being preoccupied with external things. It all is the same thing in a way. Like history repeats itself. We're all the same thing, and our problems that seems big are actually very small and have been happening here for like thousands and thousands of years. And we think too much about ourselves sometimes, and we're not that special in a way, right?
Yeah, or like we're just the latest in a very long line, right? And like
Yeah.
the Stoicism one's interesting because like I'd read Meditations and somebody was like, it was an opium addict, and I was like, what? Like that's a wild thing to find out. Because it's very interesting. Like a lot of these, like you say, the repeated personal troubles. Where like yeah, like the fact we have a common ground with people who've done things that again are like unthinkable today, like in some ways makes them even more unthinkable. Where it's like, how, like, what's the essential difference that led you to be able to do that thing? Um, like, is it many
Yeah.
smaller little like nudges in one direction? It's very interesting. To like, if you'd been born in a different time and place, like what elements remain essentially true? And it's like probably not many, if anything, right? Like so many cultural carrots and sticks which enable behaviors.
Yeah. But even though you're agnostic and haven't followed a religion, have you taken anything from it, like values or teachings, or the way you act or think and do to others, that you learn and continue to practice, to live your life, your daily life, or even if it's not from religion, where did you learn how to be who you are as a person?
So I think like for me, I've been like politically speaking, like a lot of my thought and action derives from like my kind of principal belief of that like you that one of the most powerful important things is like the ability to like choose and consent to things, and be the primary actor in your own life rather than having like life happen to you. And that's been like a really important thing to me. So that means like trying to always be the person to like empower others to make the choices for themselves rather than like dictating any kind of solutions. That's always been about like, well, what can I do to not impede upon others' choices and like kind of freedom of action.
And assuming
So I think for
responsibility
me,
too, right?
yeah, yeah, like and it's about choosing to take that stuff on, right? Like you shouldn't be doing things because someone else has put it on you. You're choosing to take on that responsibility.
Yeah.
I think a lot of that came from I read the Art of Not Being Governed really early on. I think I must have been like 15 or 16, which is by James C. Scott. It's a kind of as you described, like an anarchist history of upland Southeast Asia or something. And it's fantastic read, but it definitely changed like how I thought about a lot of things from being like I mean, all teenagers are like unpleasant. I think I was not like a massively unpleasant one, but I definitely wasn't a pleasant teenager. And that definitely changed a lot how I would like think about things and how I would like want to be in the world. And the idea of like you don't have to do things conventionally, but you don't have to be actively against. I mean, I was doing a lot of like kind of reading and thinking at the time, but also kind of seeing a lot of people like going to university in the UK is like a thing that a lot of people my age would do. Certainly from like my sort of socioeconomic bracket. And like you see a lot of other people and you see them making the choice and see how that plays out. And that was another big one where I was like, okay, like I'm affirmed in my beliefs that I need to be like supporting the people around me to do the things they want to do. Yeah, like it's. I mean, like the political term for it is anarchism, which is like a big thing. Like I apply in everything. Like I think it's but very much in the like supporting individuals way rather than the kind of like no rules way. Like, because I think that's like the like 15-year-old's appreciation for it. It's like, oh, you just don't like
Yeah,
rules, and it's like, well, no, it's like it's about choosing what you want your own rules to be almost.
it's self-organization instead of being organized by others. Like it's
Big
self-help.
time.
It's about community, because people think about anarchism. They think about people just breaking glass and putting things on fire, and it's not. It's not really that. It's
Yeah, that's not the
the
point.
monument.
That's
Yeah,
not what people are interested in. It's much more like, oh, a community garden.
yeah,
Like that's
yes, yeah.
there's
Sharing
always like that's what's the
resources. Yeah,
perfect one. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, sharing resources. Like what's the point of having stuff if you can't use it to help people? Like
yeah,
you know, it's so yeah. I think for me that's like if I do something that doesn't align with my principles, I have the partially useful, partially horrible thing. It's like a physical reaction almost. If I feel so bad that it's almost like I'm compelled to do whatever I think the right thing is. Sometimes, like I remember, I think me and the wife were out in her hometown, and there was a woman who's quite like had too much to drink or something, but she was a mess. So it was like the middle of the day, and they were like, we needed to go catch the bus. I was like, we can't just leave her. I'm gonna go sort this out. So like we called the paramedics and all the rest of it, and it was fine. But like even the thought of walking away made me almost feel sick. I was like, I've got to
yeah.
go and do something, man. Like I can't not. So partially, I guess I also don't get a choice. Like I kind of always have to do it. Yeah, but it's like you do it because like you kind of know you have to. Like it's like, well, what am I gonna do? Not help? And that's
Yeah.
like, or like, am I not gonna do the right thing here? Like, of course I'm not. Like I'm gonna help.
That's awesome. And where did you learn it? How did you learn to be? Because one of the phrases I read recently is that love is an act of service, and what you're doing is like you're spreading love. And where did you learn this? Where did you learn to be this helpful, and to be preoccupied of the well-being of others and help? Was that an example from the way you were raised? Was that the book that you read?
I I couldn't point to a specific kind of instance. I mean, like I think because my extended family on my dad's side, they all live quite local and everyone's quite nearby. So there's definitely like if something needed
A
doing, everyone
community.
kind of pitched in. Yeah,
Oh yeah.
definitely. As well as like we were in like my dad was really into like sailing small dinghies, and still is. And like there were things like if something needed doing at the where the lake was, like everyone again pitched in. And it's like whatever you could bring. And my dad, being a landscape
Yeah.
gardener, had a lot of the equipment they would need, but everyone would pitch in and help out. And I think like that was just so normalized from like so early on that it's like the idea of it being any other way is kind of weird, and I've just kind of taken that and run with it as like a mode of being all the time, not just within a community, but kind of outside of it as well, where it is just like,
Yeah.
well, why wouldn't you? Like, it's not like you're doing something that's so important that you can't help.
Of course. Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's and even like with silly things like chores around the house, it's like, oh, would you mind doing this? It's like, well, yeah, obviously. Like I'm not
Yeah.
doing
Of
anything.
course.
Like it's
Yeah.
nothing's that important. Like if you need me to run the Hoover round, I'll run the Hoover round. It's fine. And
Yeah.
that's yeah,
It's
like applying that to big things as well. Like if my friends need a lift, I'll just give them a lift. It's fine.
yeah. Yeah. I used to have this joke that's saying that giving someone a lift, it's saying "I love you," especially with the price of gas nowadays. So it's like, yeah, of course, I would give you a lift. I love you, man. Come on, yeah,
Yeah, no, well, yeah, because it's like, especially if they
it
can't drive or
is.
whatever, it's like, yeah, you just
Yeah,
can't imagine not doing it.
yeah. And look, now we're getting more into the whimsical and kind of silly questions of the podcast, which are more about getting to know you in a more friendly and fun way. So it's nonsensical questions about things that don't exist. So, uh, you know, what would you like to if you could dream about anything in the world, like when you go to sleep? What would you like to maybe dream about if you could control your dreams?
Huh. I did try and lucid dream, but I was really bad at the dream journaling part. I would just wake up and be like, I'd like sit there for a minute. I'd be like, it's already gone. It's gone. What would I lucid dream about? It's a tough one because you don't
Do
want
you
to.
reasonably remember your dreams? Like, I
It
particularly don't,
depends.
but
It
do you?
depends.
Okay.
If I'm up late on the computer, then no. That's like the big one. But if I'm like up late reading, like usually yes.
Hmm.
Um, and I've always like my dreams have always been like very determined by whatever I'm doing at that point. Like when I played a lot more video games as a kid, like my dreams would be in that video game. If I was reading a lot, I'd dream reading the book that I'd been reading before I fell asleep, which is very weird because then I get quite confused the morning afterwards trying to read it. It's like
Oh yeah,
this, none of this happened. Wait, and I was like, oh, dream reading. Okay, cool.
I've done that before. Yeah,
I think I
especially
just
studying for tests, and I started reading, studying while asleep, and it's
yeah.
terrible.
It's awful. It confuses you so much. It's usually a hint that you're doing that thing too much.
Yeah.
I think I'd be tempted to say I'd probably end up practicing like a skill or something, even though I'd want it to still be restful. But I think I would
Wow.
like try and because I've always wanted to be able to do visual art and I've never been able to, and I think a lot of that's like time and patience. But like if you're asleep, I'd do that. I'd,
Yeah.
but also
There's
I don't know.
people that like
Dreams are
listen to classes while sleeping to like learn languages. So that
yeah.
maybe could work. I don't know.
Who
Yeah, that's
knows,
a good
right?
idea.
It's yeah. It's just like because I think I'd almost because I like dreams are very interesting as like because we don't really know what's going on with that like sort of
Yeah.
like science has no idea like occultism has lots of ideas which are very fun and interesting but science is kind of clueless as to what's going on with dreams so I think it would almost like the fact that it isn't something you can control I think is like one of the more valuable things about dreams where it is like an externalized thing where it's kind of presenting like these images to you and you get to think about them, but it doesn't. You can't be like graded on how well you analyzed your own dream or thought about it. Like
Yeah.
it's just whatever you make of it, which again is interesting and valuable. And everything if you had like if I had too much control, I think I'd miss that. You know, it's like playing
Be
with your dog. Like
surprised
you
at
know
you,
you can
right?
win.
Yeah.
Yeah, you want the surprise. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. It's great. And if you could live in any fictional setting, world, universe, whatever, and what place would you choose? This can be from games, from fiction, anything. Where would you choose to live, and who would you be there?
It's a tough one because obviously there's the balance of like you want to live somewhere interesting, but a lot of the interesting places are fucking terrifying.
Yeah, it's a
Huh,
fantasy. Like you can say, oh, well, I would be
I
this
would be
knight or this
fine. Yeah,
wizard.
that's true.
Yeah,
Yeah, that is
yeah,
true. I think it's a real tough one. I think like the city of Troika would be pretty fun because that way you kind of allow yourself to do anything.
true.
And just yeah, like running a newspaper in Troika, right? That'd be pretty sick. That'd be pretty dope as like a
A
life. Like you're
tabloid
never
in
gonna get
Troika
bored.
gonna
Yeah,
be wild. Yeah.
yeah. There you go. That's the answer. That's a fun one.
Cool. And if you could have any superpower, what superpower would you choose to have? And this can be like superheroes, or it can be like abilities from fantasy creatures or characters or whatever. If you could have this supernatural power, what would you choose to have, and what would be the first thing you would do with that?
That's a real tough one. Because like there's two like modes here that you can go. You can either go for like sensible ones, like oh I'd fly because imagine the savings of time and everything else. But like I think super strength is just really funny. Like you just lift things up just to annoy people. Like you just pick them up with one hand and like they just have to deal with it. You could really get
Or you
anyone's
hold the door
nerves.
with your pinky, and nobody would.
Yeah,
Why is
just
the door not opening? I don't know.
yeah, exactly. Right? There's like endless stupid stuff you can get up to. Yeah, no, I'll convince myself. Super strength, absolutely. And like, it's just useful. It's like,
Yeah,
there's like a thing that needs
open
to be done.
jars and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Never a problem again getting to your pickles. Yeah, super strength, definitely. That's funny as hell.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. And look, if you could choose any fictional weird thing, from fiction, from games, from movies, whatever, and make that thing real in our world, what would you choose and why? And this can be a faction, NPC, an entity, like a power source, anything, and make it that thing real in our world. What would that be?
Oof, that's a tough one. Oh man, that is a very tough one. Um, oh man. I
It can
mean,
be, yeah,
just I mean, like the this might be like the cop out, but like just one of the spaceships from Traveler, man, like being able to go between planets and shit. Like, yeah, that's fantastic. Like everything
yeah,
opens up, even though it's all empty. Like, I think that's still like interesting. Like, I think that's like I want it to be like a commonplace though, not like super restricted. Like, not just one,
yeah,
like loads of them, so everyone gets one. That's the dream, right? Like, you can get out there, come back, and tell people what you saw. That's like there's a reason that's like the recurrent fantasy
yeah,
with so many like space games and stuff. It's like especially more recent ones. It's not just finding stuff. It's like you get to tell people what you found as well, and not like
yeah,
as a brag, just as a like look at this cool thing that exists. That's kind of like fantastic.
yeah. I would love to see, like, in a real super future, space exploration happen, and humanity has spread around the universe, and but see how the different cultures would kind of evolve from that, like living so separate in different worlds, in different environments, probably with different species and animals or whatever living there. It's gonna be
Yeah, it's a big
really,
thing that
really interesting. Yeah,
never gets touched in science fiction, like at least games and stuff, because it's really horribly complicated to work out. But like, yeah, the cultural drift, where like you've not seen these people for like thousands of years, and like how much has culture now changed in 1,000 years, right? Like almost nothing in common with each other. So it's
yeah.
yeah, no, definitely big time.
Finally, look, our last question is: do you remember the last time you felt really happy, grateful for being here and being alive? And if you do, can you share with us when was that and what is that you were doing?
Um, to be honest, yesterday was just a really nice day. My wife got home from being away from the weekend. I cooked a big curry that took a long time and it came out really well. Um, the weather was really nice for a change because it's been quite grey over here, but the sun was out yesterday when I went for a little walk. Honestly, yeah, yesterday was just really, really nice. Like, went to bed after reading the book I'm reading at the moment, made some good progress. Just, yeah, a really solid day. Had a chat with the friends on Discord and whatnot. Just, sometimes
Awesome.
it's
Yeah.
like not about lots of big things. It's like lots of little things where it's
Oh, yeah.
just like, yeah, it doesn't need to be a
It
grand
is about
gesture.
the small things. It's because if you're always waiting for the big things, to be happy and grateful, it can take a while, and we forget all the good things, the small good things. I read that there's kind of research that for you to internalize good things, it takes 9 times more time than to internalize bad things, because the bad stuff you have to deal with. So it's the first thing we
Yeah,
remember, like what happened today. The first thing we remember is the bad thing you had to deal with, because you had to stop and figure out and really think about that to solve. But the good things it's like an evolution trait, right? Because we had to survive, so we have to pay attention to the bad things so we can deal with them and survive. But now that survivability is kind of a taken, we have this biological thing to concentrate on the bad when we shouldn't. And so this kind of practice of gratitude can be very important for at least for me, my mental health. And
Absolutely.
what I like
It makes such a difference.
to ask you, if do you have this kind of practice? Do you remind yourself to look for these little things?
I think for me, like the big one is like if something is annoying me or like pissing me off, like I just allow myself to be annoyed and then I move on. Like rather than trying to like hold it under control and like not show it and like allow it to get internalized. Like if something's annoying, I just kind of like go like shit, and that's it. Like I let it out. It's all gone. So like I don't
Let
kind of
press
allow
through,
the like I just immediately allow myself to be annoyed, and then once I've been annoyed, I've kind of like chewed my food, as it were, and it's gone. Like it's not a problem anymore.
Wow, yeah.
But I should
That's
probably, it's just
Yeah.
it's. I've always been able to just be like, I'm annoyed. Okay, now I'm not. Like it's because I've been annoyed. Like if I carry on being annoyed, that'd be silly, and I can't do that, so it's fine.
Yeah, it is.
But having
It's
a
a
gratitude
training
practice
I
would
do.
probably be useful.
Yeah. I realize I'm annoyed and then I'm shutting down, and I'm being distant, and I'm like, what is that you're doing? Why are you annoyed? It's not gonna make you feel better. It's not gonna solve the situation. It's not gonna make anyone around you feel better because they will feel you distant. So it's really just worse for me, right? So
Yeah,
I'm
exactly.
it's not doing any good. It's actually doing bad. So yeah. But I have to talk to I have to talk through the process. Like I realize I'm annoyed, and it's hard. Wow, it is.
Start again from the beginning, sort of thing. Yeah, but it's doing it. It's one day at a time, right?
Yeah, it's training. Yeah.
Definitely.
Luke, thank you so much for being here. We're talking about many interesting topics. I learned a lot. You had a lot to share and to teach, so I'm very, very grateful for that. And do you have maybe any last words for the wonderful weirdos that are listening to us?
Just keep going. Just keep being weird. Just do your own thing. It's fine. No,
Yeah.
If nobody cares, nobody cares. It's great.
Yeah,
If people
it
are
is.
interested, they're interested. It's fine.
That's true. Like we also think everybody is caring and noticing us and thinking about maybe criticizing us, but everybody is really busy with their own stuff. So yeah. Nobody cares. Just do you and be weird.
Yeah, absolutely. The worst thing you could be is boring, right?
Yeah. And look, can you take us out saying the catchphrase of the show? Keep it weird, everybody.
All right, keep it weird, everybody, and see you next time.
Thank you for listening to Weird Games and Weirder People. If you'd like to keep up with the show, please subscribe to be notified when we release new episodes. If you'd like to support us, please leave a review or head on to code-fi.com/WGNWP. See you next time, and remember, weird is the new wonderful.